When life had already turned to dust, the past knocked on his door. The morning hung heavy over the plains. A pale sun crept through a haze of dust, glinting off the broken glass of the farmhouse windows. The wind moved through the dead corn stalks, whispering through every crack, as if the land itself were sighing. Walter Green stood on his porch, a man shaped by years of loss. His skin was the color of the earth he'd worked all his life, cracked, dry, and stubborn. The house leaned slightly to one side, tired of holding itself together. Behind it stretched a barren field, once golden with promise, now just an ocean of grey dirt. Nothing moved except the wind. Even the old mule, Sam, stood still near the barn, ears drooping, eyes dull. The world around him felt paused, as though time had simply stopped caring. He'd buried his wife 10 years ago. His son had gone north, chasing work, chasing anything. The letters had stopped after the first winter. Now, silence was his only company. Walter lived by routine, feeding the mule, fixing what could be fixed, ignoring what couldn't. He no longer dreamed. But he hadn't learned to quit, either. That morning, he noticed the dust rising far down the road, the postman's truck, a rare visitor. Walter wiped his hands on his worn trousers and waited. The truck rolled to a stop, coughing a cloud of dirt into the air. "Morning, Mr. Green," the postman called, handing him a thick envelope stamped with an official seal. "Looks important. Courthouse letter." Walter frowned, turning it over. Across the top were the words, "Official notice of inheritance." For a moment, he just stood there, heart thudding slow and uncertain. Then he tore it open with his calloused fingers. The letter spoke of a man named Fielding Green, a distant relative, his grandfather's brother, recently deceased. Walter was named the sole heir. Property, livestock, equipment, coordinates, a deed number, a chance. He read it twice, his hands trembling. The words didn't feel real, but they burned into his chest like a forgotten ember of hope. A farm, his again, maybe. A new beginning. He folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, and sat in silence. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't blank. It was alive, thinking, planning. That night, he couldn't sleep. The wind knocked softly at the shutters, and rain whispered against the glass, the kind of sound that makes a man remember who he used to be. He imagined rows of green, a white porch, laughter drifting through warm air. He imagined home, though he'd almost forgotten the meaning of the word. By dawn, he had decided. He sold what little he could, packed a single bag, some tools, an old lantern, a photograph of his wife. He tied Sam the mule to the back of his pickup and whispered, "You're coming with me, old friend." Then he started the engine. The sound startled the silence, scattering a flock of blackbirds into the pale sky. The road stretched west, endless and empty. He drove for miles through towns that had died long before he arrived, places where the gas pumps rusted like forgotten tombstones, where old signs still promised fresh pie to ghosts. At every stop, people looked at him the way you look at someone chasing something that doesn't exist. But Walter didn't care. The road was his only heartbeat now. As the day faded, the horizon turned the color of rust. The wind rose again, humming through the plains. When the last stretch of road ended, a crooked wooden sign appeared, Green County Line. And there it was. A lonely rise of ground, a sagging shed, and beside it, a wagon, half sunk in the dirt, its planks black with rot. The only mark of ownership were two faint letters carved on the side. F.G. Walter killed the engine. The silence rushed in, vast and cold. He stepped out, boots crunching on dry earth, staring at what was supposed to be his inheritance. The house was gone. No fences. No animals. No life. Just a dead wagon and a field that hadn't known a crop in decades. He walked closer, the envelope still in his pocket. The air smelled of dust and old wood. For a moment, he thought he heard something faint, a creak, a breath, from inside the wagon. But when he stopped to listen, there was nothing. Only the wind, and the long, hollow echo of his own disappointment. Walter sat on the broken wheel, rubbed the dust from his palms, and laughed, low, bitter, and tired. He had driven across 2 states for this. A rotted wagon and an acre of silence. But something in him refused to turn back. Even as the sun died over the horizon, painting the land in blood and rust, he whispered to the wind, "If this is a joke, it's a cruel one." And somewhere deep in the empty fields, the wind answered with a sound almost like a whisper, a voice too faint to understand, too old to belong to the living. Sometimes the land doesn't keep treasures. It keeps the guilt of those who died on it. The next morning came without sound. The sky was pale, empty, the color of ash. Walter woke stiff and sore inside his truck, the air thick with the smell of dust and rain that never came. The wagon stood a few yards away, half buried in earth, its shadow stretching long and crooked like a scar. He stepped out and walked the property line, if you could call it that. No fences. No markers. Just cracked soil and brittle weeds that rattled like bones when the wind passed through. The letter had promised a ranch, barns, livestock, equipment. But all he saw was absence. Even the birds avoided the sky above this place. By noon, he drove into the nearest town, a cluster of old buildings and rusted signs that leaned against the wind like tired men. The wooden sign at the edge read Green Creek, though the creek had long since dried. A bell jingled weakly as he stepped into the diner. The smell of burnt coffee and fried dough clung to the air. A few men sat at the counter, shoulders hunched, talking quietly. Their voices stopped the moment Walter entered. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and lipstick faded to memory, gave him a cautious smile. "You're not from around here," she said. Walter nodded. "I came for some land. Fielding Green's property." The name fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. The silence that followed was almost polite, almost. Then someone at the counter laughed. A dry, knowing laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," said a man in overalls, his boots propped on the stool beside him. "The legend lives on." Another added, "You mean to tell us you inherited that?" Laughter spread, quiet but sharp. Walter forced a faint smile. "So you've heard of it?" The waitress poured him coffee, her eyes softening just a little. "Everybody's heard of it," she said. "Old Fielding's place. That land's cursed. Honey. Hasn't grown a thing since before I was born." The man in overalls leaned closer, grinning. Fielding Green was mad. Spent his last years talking to himself, digging holes in the dirt, claiming there was gold or water or God knows what under that wagon. Wouldn't sell, wouldn't move. Died right there in it. Walter's jaw tightened. He said quietly, "He left something behind." The laughter came again, not cruel, just hollow, the laughter of men who stopped believing in miracles long ago. The waitress shrugged. "They say he buried things. Letters, trinkets, bones. Folks used to see his lantern moving out there at night, under the hill. Maybe you'll find what he was looking for." Walter finished his coffee and left a few coins on the counter. When he pushed open the door, every eye followed him until the bell stopped ringing. Outside, the town looked smaller than before. The sun pressed hard, flattening everything it touched. He drove back in silence, the sound of their laughter echoing in his mind. Back at the property, the light was already dimming. The wagon waited, half swallowed by its own shadow. He stared at it for a long moment, then lit his lantern and walked closer. The wood was soft under his fingers, swollen with age. He noticed something odd. The lower planks were newer than the rest, nailed roughly into place. When he tapped them, they sounded hollow. His pulse quickened. He grabbed his pocket knife and pried one loose. The nail came free with a groan. Beneath the board, wedged between two beams, was a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He pulled it out carefully, the dust of decades rising around him. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed, fragile. A hand-drawn map. Crude, almost childlike, showing a square of land with an X scratched into the middle. On the back, 4 words written in faded ink. "Don't let them take it." The firelight behind him flickered. A gust of wind swept across the plain, scattering ashes from the night before. Walter looked around, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. The wagon creaked. Once. Then again. He turned sharply, lantern trembling in his hand. The door shifted on its hinge, whispering against the wind. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then, from inside the wagon, came a dull thud. One sound. Heavy. Final. Walter froze. The lantern flame flooded. The silence pressed close around him, alive and watching. He whispered to no one, "Who's there?" No answer, only the echo of his voice rolling back from the emptiness. He stepped closer, every instinct telling him not to. But something in him, curiosity, or maybe fate, wouldn't let him stop. He touched the door. It moved an inch, sighing open. The darkness inside smelled of rot and time. Nothing. No one. Just the hollow interior and a single chain swaying from the beam. Walter exhaled slowly. Wind, he muttered, though the air was still. He closed the door, set the lantern down, and sat beside the wheel. But sleep never came. Every creak, every whisper of the boards, sounded like a memory trying to speak. The map lay open on his lap. The ink shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. And the words, "Don't let them take it," pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. Something was buried here. And whatever it wasn't finished yet. Sometimes madness is just truth spoken too early. The dawn broke in silence. No birds, no movement, just a dull grey light creeping across the land. Walter stood by the wagon, staring at the planks he had pried loose the night before. The words on the map echoed in his head, "Don't let them take it." He didn't know who they were, or what was worth taking, but he could feel it. Something waited beneath this ground. He fetched his shovel from the truck. The air smelled of dust and cold iron. Every strike of the metal against the soil rang like a heartbeat. The ground was hard, but he kept digging, sweat tracing dark lines through the dust on his face. After an hour, the shovel hit something that wasn't stone. A dull clang. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the dirt. There it was, a rusted tin box, the kind people used to keep deeds and secrets in. Its hinges squealed when he pried it open. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with leather and a small brass compass that trembled as if alive. He unfolded the first page. The handwriting was small, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "I have no heirs but the land itself. Let it remember what men tried to erase. They came for the water, not the soil. Beneath this earth lies what they stole from us. If you are blood of my blood, guard it, for they will return when the ground calls again." The signature read Fielding Green. Walter's throat tightened. The old man hadn't been crazy. He'd been protecting something. He turned another page. Dates, sketches, arguments with county officials, words like survey, deed, ownership dispute. Each letter told fragments of a war fought not with guns but with papers and silence. The last note ended abruptly, the ink smeared, as if the writer's hand had trembled. Walter sat still, the pages trembling in his grip. He looked toward the horizon where the land dipped slightly, remembering the mark on the map, the X. Maybe it wasn't just a symbol. Maybe it was a place. He pocketed the compass and started walking. The sun hung low, its light pale and sharp. Each step sank into the dry soil with a hollow crunch. When he reached the low ridge, the ground felt different beneath his boots, firmer, compacted, almost metallic. He dropped to his knees, scraping away the top layer with his hands. A ring of rusted steel emerged, a circular lid the width of a table, sealed tight. He tapped it with the shovel. The sound echoed deep, as if there were space below. His heart pounded. He worked the edges loose until the handle gave a small, reluctant shift. Then, with one final pull, the lid cracked open. A breath of air escaped, cold, damp, ancient. It smelled like stone and forgotten rain. He lowered his lantern into the gap and gasped. Light flickered over the reflection of water. Clear, still, deep. A hidden reservoir, alive beneath the dead land. Walter laughed under his breath, half disbelief, half awe. The old man had been right. There was water here, a river trapped beneath the bones of the earth. If the world had known, maybe this land would never have died. He leaned closer, the cold air brushing against his face. A strange sound reached him, a low hum, like wind moving through a narrow tunnel. He realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was breathing. He jerked back, the lantern swaying, light flashing across the field. Nothing. No one. Only silence. Still, the feeling didn't leave, that someone, or something, was watching. The memory of the night before returned, that dull thud from the wagon. The sound of movement in the dark. He turned toward the horizon. A faint vibration rolled through the ground. Not thunder. Not wind. Engines. 2 distant lights blinked once, then disappeared. Walter's mouth went dry. Someone else knew. He replaced the lid carefully, brushed dirt over it, and ran his hands through his hair. The sky was bleeding red with sunset, and every shadow on the plain seemed alive. He walked back toward the wagon, lantern trembling in his grasp. Inside, the air was thick and stale. The tin box lay open, the papers whispering as the wind slipped through the cracks. He sat there for a long time, reading by the flicker of flame. Every line of Fielding's words felt like prophecy now. They will return when the ground calls again. The ground had called, through the letter, the map, the whisper of water. And now, someone had heard. He put the letters back in the box, pressed his palm against the cold metal lid, and whispered, "You kept your secret, old man. I'll keep it, too." Outside, the night was rising, and the land, silent, patient, eternal, seemed to wait for what would come next. Those who once stole will always return to finish the theft. The morning began with silence too heavy to trust. Even the wind had gone still, as if the world were holding its breath. Walter stood near the ridge, staring at the buried lid, the one that guarded Fielding's secret. The soil above it looked untouched again, but he knew better. Beneath that crust of dust, the earth was alive, whispering with the sound of hidden water. He didn't notice the car until he heard it, the hum of an engine cutting through the stillness like a blade. A black SUV appeared on the road, its surface gleaming like oil under the harsh sun. It stopped a few yards from his truck. A man stepped out. Tall, clean, grey suit pressed sharp enough to slice the air. His shoes sank slightly in the dust. He frowned, as if offended by the land itself. "Mr. Green," he said smoothly, voice polished like glass. "My name is Mason. Harland Water and Resources. I believe we need to talk." Walter didn't move. He watched the man's hands, soft, manicured, built for pens, not tools. "What about?" he asked. Mason smiled in that professional way that wasn't really a smile. "Property lines," he said. "A clerical error. It seems this parcel of land was incorrectly registered as private decades ago. Technically, it belongs to our company. A simple misunderstanding. I'm here to clear it up." Walter felt the anger rise slow and cold. "I have the deed," he said. "Of course," Mason replied pleasantly. "But old deeds can be confusing. Courts make mistakes. My superiors are prepared to offer you a generous compensation for your time, and for any inconvenience." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and extended it. The gesture was calm, practiced. Walter didn't take it. "What's under this ground that's worth lying for?" he asked. Mason's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief, sharp crack in the mask. Then the smile returned. "Mr. Green," he said, lowering his voice, "I advise you to be careful with what you think you know. Sometimes a man finds things better left alone." He slipped the envelope back into his coat and turned toward the SUV. "I'll be back in a few days," he said lightly. "I'm sure you'll reconsider." The car rolled away, leaving nothing but the hiss of dust behind it. Walter stood for a long time, staring at the fading tracks. He knew now. They had known about the water all along. Fielding hadn't been paranoid. He had been hunted. That night, the valley was darker than usual. The stars seemed farther away. Walter sat by the wagon, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. The fire crackled beside him, its glow reflecting in the brass compass. The letters lay open, their edges trembling in the breeze. From somewhere far off came a sound, faint, mechanical. A hum, like an engine idling in the distance. He froze. Then, a flicker of orange. It started small, beneath the wagon shadow. By the time he reached it, the flame was already crawling up the dry boards. "Damn it!" he shouted, grabbing his coat and beating at the fire. Smoke rose fast, thick and black. The old wood caught like paper. The flames climbed higher, reflecting in his eyes, lighting the whole clearing in a feverish glow. The mule screamed, pulling at its tether. Walter coughed, stumbling through the smoke. He tore away a plank and found the tin box still where he'd hidden it. He snatched it, clutching it tight against his chest, then turned back toward the blaze. The wagon collapsed in a shower of sparks. The air stank of resin and ash. He fell to his knees, hands burned, lungs raw. The fire devoured what was left of Fielding's shelter, the last trace of the man who'd kept the secret alive. When at last the flames died, only a skeleton of charred beams remained. The ground steamed under the cooling ash, and beneath the ruin, faintly, the edge of the buried lid gleamed in the firelight, untouched. Walter stared at it through the smoke. They had tried to burn it out of existence. They hadn't found it. He sat there until dawn, watching the embers fade. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burnt wood and rain that still wouldn't fall. He whispered through his teeth, voice hoarse and trembling but steady. "You didn't finish the job." Not this time. The land around him was blackened, scarred, silent, but alive. He could feel it, pulsing faintly beneath the soot, like a heartbeat buried deep in the ground. And as the first weak light of morning spilled across the horizon, Walter Green, blistered, coughing, exhausted, rose to his feet, clutching the tin box to his chest. The fire hadn't destroyed his resolve. It had forged it. The land had chosen its keeper again. Truth, like water, always finds a way to the surface. The dawn came grey and heavy, dragging a low mist across the scorched field. Ash swirled around Walter's boots as he stood where the wagon had burned to bones. The air still smelled of smoke and iron. But beneath that, faint and clean, was another scent, the breath of wet soil. He crouched, scooping a handful of dirt. It was damp. The underground current was rising, pressing up through the wounded earth as if the land itself refused to stay buried. The mule stood restless near the truck, its eyes rolling white. Walter rubbed its neck gently. "Easy, old friend. We are not done yet." He spent the morning circling the property, tracing fresh tracks in the dust. Boot prints. Heavy ones. Someone had been here during the night, close enough to see the fire die. Near the ridge, he found a crushed cigarette butt. The blue stamp on the paper was faint but unmistakable. Harland Water and Resources. He straightened slowly, anger tightening every muscle. They'd come back. They'd watched the flames. They wanted him gone. By midday he'd made up his mind. He couldn't fight this alone. Some truths needed to be spoken out loud. He loaded the tin box into the truck, wrapped it in his coat, and drove east, toward a name that had lingered in Fielding's letters. 2 hours later, he found her. Dr. Sarah McKenna, historian, former land surveyor, the only person who had once believed Fielding's claims. Her small house stood on the edge of a dying town, half hidden behind wild roses. When she opened the door, she looked at Walter like she was seeing a ghost. "Fielding Green's name," she whispered. "I haven't heard it in 30 years. Walter held out the tin box. "You're about to again." She read in silence for a long time, the papers trembling in her hands. Her expression shifted, disbelief, sorrow, then resolve. "If these letters are real," she said finally, "then Harland built half their empire on stolen land. On stolen water." Walter nodded. "Then it's time the world knew." Sarah exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a prayer. "I can make calls. I still have friends in the archives, at the university, in the press." She looked him in the eyes. Fielding was right. You have to let people see it. Walter said nothing. He just handed her the compass. "The land will guide you," he murmured. By the time he returned to Green Creek, evening had bled across the sky. The ridge glowed red in the fading light, and the earth shimmered with the faint sheen of new water seeping through. For the first time in decades, the land smelled alive. But when he reached the clearing, his heart sank. Fresh tire marks carved deep into the road. Footprints around the ridge. And the lid, the one he had buried again, was smeared with grease and oil, as if someone had tried to force it open. He clenched his fists. "They're not giving up," he whispered. The wind carried his words away like sparks. The next morning, the valley wasn't empty anymore. Trucks lined the road, reporters, cameramen, officials. And there, stepping from the familiar black SUV, was Mason. "Mr. Green," he called, voice colder now. "You've made quite the spectacle. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Walter didn't answer. Behind him, the trench glimmered with flowing water, clear, endless, undeniable. News microphones pointed like spears. A reporter shouted, "Is it true you found the original Green well? That the company forged the deeds?" Walter looked into the camera lens. "Yes," he said simply. "They took what wasn't theirs. But the land remembered." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mason's face twitched, the calm mask cracking. He leaned close, voice low. "You just declared war on men who own half this state." Walter's reply was steady. "Then they should have thought of that before stealing from the other half." By noon, the valley was alive. Townspeople gathered, whispering, pointing, filming. The story spread faster than fire ever could. Fielding Green's letters. The hidden reservoir. The proof of corruption. It was all out now, unstoppable. Sarah arrived at his side, dirt on her boots, triumph in her eyes. I sent copies to the archives, the governor's office, and every paper within 300 miles, she said. They can't silence this anymore. Walter looked at her, then at the land. Water glimmered in shallow streams, curling between the cracks like silver veins. It caught the sunlight, flowing around the charred remains of the wagon's frame. The valley was breathing again. A week passed. The courthouse ruled. Green estate restored. Harland Water indicted for fraud and environmental violation. Mason and his men were finished. The people of Green Creek returned to the land they'd abandoned. Together they built a new fence, raised a new barn, and planted seed in soil that was finally wet again. When the first shoots of green broke through the earth, someone laughed, not cruelly this time, but with wonder. One evening, as the sky turned gold, they gathered by the ridge. A stone marker had been placed beside the stream, carved with simple words, "In memory of Fielding Green, and those who kept faith with the earth." Walter stood before it, hat in hand. He laid down the brass compass and whispered, "You can rest now, old friend. The land remembers." The water murmured softly in reply. The mule grazed nearby, tail swishing lazily in the breeze. For the first time in years, the valley smelled of life, of wet clay, grass, and the promise of rain. That night, Walter sat by his new cabin, built from the salvaged boards of the old wagon. On the wall above his desk hung Fielding's map, framed beside the restored deed. Beneath them, in rough handwriting, he'd carved a single line. "The real inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you fight to return." Thunder rolled softly beyond the hills. Raindrops began to fall, tapping gently on the roof. The earth drank greedily, darkening under the storm's touch. Walter smiled, eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of renewal. And just before he turned in, headlights glimmered on the wet road. The postman stepped out, soaked to the bone but grinning. "Another letter for you, Mr. Green." The envelope bore a familiar seal, the State Archives. Walter opened it, heart steady. The words inside read, "We have located additional documentation concerning unclaimed property once belonging to the Green family." He looked out across the valley, rain silvering the land, and whispered, almost to the wind, "So the story's not over after all." The thunder answered like distant applause. The valley shimmered in the stormlight, alive, reborn, eternal. And Walter Green, the last keeper of memory, smiled as the rain washed the ash from his hands.